movies come out in theatres and that's it. That's the movie. It then gets released months later on home video and streaming services, and it's the same movie that was in theatres, as you would expect. But some movies go through changes. Some movies get longer cuts, gorier cuts, shorter cuts, more explicit cuts. Sometimes the director of the movie goes back and re-edits that movie and then releases a new cut of that movie on home video, on streaming services, or in theatres as well. Often, this happens because of time and budget. Movies must be made by a certain deadline, so the final result has to be whatever there is at the time. The director then goes back and essentially finishes crafting their vision after the movie has been released. Other times, it's because the movie was well received or liked, and the studio wants to make a special version of it for the fans, or the money. And sometimes it's because the director had little to no control over the theatrical release version of the movie, and they've since been given the opportunity to craft the version of the movie that they initially wanted. Bottom line, there are lots of director's cuts out there, or extended cuts, or whatever you want to call them. Some are large in scale and scope, some vastly change the movie and its structure or pacing, and some just add more violence, action, or nudity. These are what I think are the best director's cuts, known also as extended cuts like I've just mentioned, from worst to best, ranked.
I don't want your suffering. I don't want your future.
Please. We need you to hope again.
X-Men Days of Future Past, probably the best X-Men movie we have at this point. It was released, it got good reviews, it did well. But people noticed something. The trailers revealed that Anna Paquin's Rogue was going to be in the movie, only she didn't end up in the movie. As it turns out, there's a whole different version of the movie where her character plays a much more pivotal role, where there's an alternate sequence which is really pivotal to the story, where things happen, where there's different lines, different takes, gorier violence, more foul language, called the Rogue Cut. X-Men Days of Future Past, the Rogue Cut, is equally as good as the original version. Some might say slightly better. But at the end of the day, it tells the same story, just a bit differently. And from different lines, different character moments. The back end of the story, though, is where things really get shaken up, where certain characters are there that weren't there in the original cut. It's an intriguing, interesting take on the director's cut, and one that doesn't necessarily improve things, but gives a much fuller idea of what the original idea was. Once Upon a Time in America is a 4-hour plus epic gangster film, the sort that would make Martin Scorsese sweat. It was also a movie that had much of its original content cut, for reasons. In the years that followed, 2 longer versions were crafted to more suitably replicate the intentions of the director, with many of the changes focused on how the film ends. In short, any version of the film is great, but long, and also the longer the better, because there's still a lot of that film that was meant to be seen that just hasn't seen the light of day yet.
Get up, you son of a bitch!
All those fighters you beat them with heart!
Get up! Get up!
Get up.
In terms of its story and plotting, there's not a lot different in Sylvester Stallone's director's cut of Rocky IV. Instead, this director's cut changes the mood and the pacing, removing the goofier elements such as the infamous robot and adding in new takes and cuts of scenes as well as more character moments, which help focus in on the characters and the story and the drama a little more. It makes Rocky IV a better, fuller experience while still retaining the things most fans enjoyed about the theatrical version, and it links it closer thematically and stylistically to the earlier movies. Apocalypse Now has a storied history, not worth diving into much here. It was a troubleshoot to say the least. It also is a film that has 3 different versions: the theatrical version, the Redux version, and the final cut. Coppola, the director, prefers the final cut, a brisk 182 minutes long, that's 3 hours. He believes his Redux version is too long and it impacts both the pacing and the story. The non-theatrical versions improve on the characters, fleshing them out and making them more engaging and likeable, but risk the story in the process. It might be that there's no perfect version of Apocalypse Now, but the final cut is the most accessible, the most enjoyable, and the most watchable today.
The big one's just as strong as Superman.
If you've only seen the first part, you haven't seen the best part. The adventure continues in Superman 2.
Like many director's cuts, there's controversy in the background of Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut. The original director was fired due to a ballooning budget, so a new director came aboard to finish the film. Only for years later, much of Richard Donner's original footage was then found and then re-edited into a final, definitive version. Sadly, he didn't get to finish making his version of the movie, so the director's cut, the Richard Donner cut, is unfinished, with test footage and poorly shot scenes added in to flesh things out. But the Donner cut of Superman 2 is better than the theatrical version, with a different tone and vibe, more characters, and a greater sense of what the initial goal was.
What seems to be the problem?
Death. I want more life.
Blade Runner is a slow, methodical detective noir in a cyberpunk world, loosely based on the novel. It's also a movie that has seen several cuts over the years, with the official final cut being the canonical entry in the franchise. The final cut of Blade Runner is the best version, with Ridley Scott finally nailing the tone and mood and eliminating the use of voiceover completely. Blade Runner never saw the attention or acclaim it deserved upon release because this version was released years later. Had this version, the final cut, been released first, things might have been very different.
They said the age of heroes would never come again.
It will. It has to.
The story behind Zack Snyder's Justice League is a long, convoluted but interesting one. In short, he was the original director. He was removed from the project, then years later he got an opportunity to finish what he started. This version of Justice League is much better than the theatrical version, with greater character moments, a more fully realised story, and in many ways it serves as a love letter to fans of DC and of Snyder's work. Not everything in his cut needed to be there. It is way too long, and the choice of aspect ratio is an interesting one too. but this is the best version of Justice League, and it's Snyder's best DC movie, in my opinion.
Aliens. This time, it's war.
James Cameron's Aliens is an action horror film that takes the Aliens franchise into grander, more operatic science fiction area than the original Alien by Ridley Scott. Fans have argued for years over which of the movies is the best. Personally, I go with this one, specifically the director's cut. The director's cut of Aliens makes the movie a 2.5-hour epic, adding in more world building, some cool character moments, a couple of action scenes, and great attention and scope. It doesn't drastically change the movie, but it does make it better, fleshing out the world more, as well as the characters. And that's what a director's cut should do. Also shout out to Alien 3, which wasn't done by the director, but is still a much better extended cut of that movie.
A day may come when the courage of men fails, but it is not this day. This day we fight!
For Frodo.
The Lord of the Rings Trilogy Extended Edition.
Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy is a masterpiece. The extended cuts of those already epic scale and scope movies are even better, with hours of new footage across the trilogy. There are new characters, new subplots, new action scenes, new locations, more character moments, and much, much more. These extended cuts not only make the movies better, but add a great deal of content that in retrospect makes the original version seem rather barren and unfulfilling in comparison. Return of the King is perhaps the best example, in which it provides greater closure for some of the characters. It then expands on a fairly significant subplot, fully realising it, and it makes the more dramatic moments and the big battles much heavier with more weight and emotion behind them. These extended cuts are really something special. Just make sure you have several hours to sit through them. And those are what I think are the best directors or extended cuts we have right now. Of course, there's a lot of them out there. Let me know in the comments and feedback what your favourite extended or director's cuts are, and of course subscribe to my channel for more content like this. Until next time though, thanks for watching.